Okay, this is Jimmy Jive, and you're listening to Motor City Rock Talk. Today, my guest is a guitarist, vocalist from Roulette. My guest today is Joe Motor. How you doing, Joe?
Good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. First of all, let's get into a little background. Tell me where you're originally from.
Born and raised in Madison Heights, basically. East Side, Royal Oak area. Pretty musical background. A lot of my cousins are musicians. My uncle, accordion player, whatever. Just, we always had a piano in the house. I have four sisters playing music all the time. Yeah, pretty musical background. And sort of what caught my ear initially was the guitar groups at church and folk music and things like that. I was, as soon as I saw a guitar, I was like, that's me right there. And so, at 5 years old, bugged the crap out of my parents. I want a guitar.
5 years old? Wow.
Yeah, I actually started, it was funny because my parents were like, well, he's left-hand, we'll have to see if we can find a guitar. And go into the music shop, and the guy's like, we don't have any. So, it's very hard, especially at that point in time, to find a left-handed guitar. They just said, here. And so, but Rick Emmett, there's a few guys, Rick Emmett from Triumph is a lefty that plays right-handed. Gary Moore, I believe, is kind of helps your right hand out a little bit. Different sound. I can kind of relate to those players just based on the fact that they're lefties.
You didn't learn to play as a lefty, you learned to play as a righty.
Yep.
Wow.
Full righty.
Wow. Well, that had to make it even more challenging because you're right, back in those days, especially locally, it would have been tough to find a guitar for a left-handed player. And even for some of the stars, they'd have to recreate it or reconstruct it. You mentioned Rick Emmett. Was he one of your earliest influences then?
Actually, further than that back, I would say, just the folk stuff. I mean, obviously, Jim Croce, those types of folks. And then my mom was always, you should, learn classical and read music. So I took from Baba's Studios in Birmingham, and it has a bunch of books that were written at one point, classical studies. So, it was like guitar on the left leg, elevate the foot 8 inches, did a bunch of competitions. I kind of got bored with that after a couple of years. I was probably 8 or 9. I would do well in these competitions. People were like 5 times my age, and I would go up there and I won a lot of medals, a bunch of trophies. And I felt like my teacher was Italian guy, Eligio Di Bernardo. He just was using me to win a bunch of trophies for his studio.
Right.
Meanwhile, I could hear this other teacher across the hall playing, I could tell it was Ted Nugent, and it was the more rock stuff. I'd hear like a Kiss song, and I struggled with it for a couple months because I knew I had to tell my teacher I wanted to switch to the guy across the hall. He goes, I finally ask him tell him one day, I'm like, Legio, I kind of want to play rock and roll. And he's like, oh, you don't want to play this. And he plays Smoke on the Water, on a classical guitar. Right. And it's, which sounds like what you'd think it sounds like. And then I looked at him and go, yeah, and he kind of he was disappointed because I wasn't going to win a bunch of trophies for him, but I immediately went over to this guy, Rick Baranowski, I believe was his name. He got me into scales, some jazz stuff, introduced me to Al Di Meola, showed me a bunch of Kiss songs, a lot of scales, a lot of theory that I didn't fully grasp at that point in time. I was just playing a lot of notes and not really, executing things. But at that point, discovering Ace Frehley, the Ace Frehley vibrato, so that kind of technique, some of the pentatonic riffs, early, Billy Gibbons, ZZ Top, huge influence, Ted Nugent, obviously, being from Detroit, just his pentatonics were so fast, and Stranglehold and songs like that were out at that time. I'm just like, wow, how do I get there, And so I took from that guy for a while. And then when I was about a junior in high school, sort of had been in a couple bands, I ended up the guy that really connected it for me musically, scale wise and riff wise and everything was Joey Mazzola, who's in the band Sponge. Yeah, and he used to teach at a place on Woodward in roughly 11 Mile called Rock City. And I went in there one day to get pickups, or I wanted to swap out I saved up enough money to get a triple pickup Les Paul, like Peter Frampton. Yeah, and I could hear him jamming. I'm like, oh my God. Like he was playing Lynch type stuff it was really, out there.
Right.
Like these real compound hammer-on pull-offs, he knew all the right chords, the right versions of chords to play AC/DC. Like I would play Back in Black and then go, yeah, I know that one. He kind of uses this chord and not that chord, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I owe a lot to Joe Mazzola just for like taking the scales that I learned, jazz background, and actually being able to apply them in more of a bluesy sort of rock, you know, sort of template. And so I have to give props to Joe Mazzola. He's the man.
All right, well, let's move on a little bit. You mentioned a couple of early bands. What were the names of these bands?
Initially, I think, you know, my buddy Jeff Simmons,
Yeah.
we were in a band called Eternity. That was, you know, maybe 7th grade, 8th grade. We played Hazel Park outside events, like cool little shows. We had a girl singer for a while, Carrie Spano. So we were doing a lot of Pat Benatar, Hart, Blondie. Kind of a neat mix. Interesting to learn some of the newer wave kind of stuff going on in the earlier 80s. Then I ran into, through Jeff actually, a couple guys from Royal Oak, my friend Roger Cole, Bob Larson. We got together, ultimately ended up with a drummer that I went to high school with, Tom Hernandez, who was in Mr. Big, another East Side band, Mommy's Dearest, or not Mr. Big, The Big, Mommy's Dearest. We started playing out, and the cool thing with that band, we started playing bars. I was probably 16 or so.
You were playing bars at 16.
Yeah, and when the Ritz was called the main act, I had the fortunate experience of being able to warm up some of the coolest bands in the early 80s. The Almighty Strut, Bittersweet Alley, and Toby Red would all play the main act like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Yep.
We sort of became the house warm-up band for those guys, like 2 weeks in a month, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then they would stick us in the club called Mr. Pips, was in the same building. Like there was the Ritz for the main act at that time, a bowling alley, and then this other little club that we would play the joyous nights of Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday on school nights.
Right.
But, you know, then actually get up and go to school the next day. But watching Toby Red and Bittersweet Alley and the Almighty Strut and actually just watching those guys, that when I was 16, 17, those guys were, you know, whatever, 4 or 5 years older. To sit there and watch those bands was just magic. Because they were, you know, this whole level ahead of where we were at. So like, oh my God, we gotta bust our chops for this, you know, and get to that level. So then, you know, it's interesting because I was in Slyboy later with Ronnie Masters, but he started getting interested in music, and we knew each other at that point from high school. Ended up bumping into him, wrote a bunch of songs, which ended up some of them being Roulette songs. But we never got into a jam situation where we could keep it going. Like we had the drummer from Heaven's Wish for a while, Snake from Sweet Teas playing bass for a while, never could get it off the ground. So in the meantime, I ended up in a band. I started teaching on 8 Mile music shop called Gus Zoppy Music.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it's pretty well. In fact, I'm going out to breakfast with the whole crew next Wednesday, which will be kind of fun. Yeah, we get together every now and then, kind of family. But yeah, I taught guitar there for a while and ended up, funny story, the guy that taught across from me, huge Charvel fan, I am as well. This guy Kenny would bring in a Telly, Charvel, and I have an 81 sort of Jakey Lee, and he would be, you know, if his student didn't show up and mine did, we would end up swapping guitars and just shooting the crap. And so I get like super cool dude, real bluesy bass. I get Devil Without a Cause. I buy that, and I'm like, holy shit, that's Kenny Olson. And, you know, at that point, I was in Roulette. I'm like, man, I joined the wrong band. But he knew Bob, and he's from the Romeo sort of area. Right. But yeah, I guess after all that, I 4 years in between that, I did college, graduated from college. Met the guys in Roulette at the music shop I worked at. You know, still kind of wanting to get into a band with Ronnie at one point, but Roulette was a band that was in existence and kind of split up. We had a singer for a while that I never really wanted to be the singer. I'd rather just play. But singers, you know singers, LSD. Yeah, it's uncanny how true that can be. So I ended up with those guys, and we ran with Roulette for a few years. With me on lead vocals, Matt Jackson on guitar, Daryl Schneck, Pat Morgan. Tried to get into, it's interesting because we tried to get into the Ritz, weekend shows, and there were certain bands that sort of had a lock on it. Seduce is one, of course, and they deserve it. But we were a newer band, another band, Sweet Teas, who I'm good friends with those guys. Went to high school with the drummer, and we just never could get. They'd give us a Thursday night. It was tough to break into the bigger clubs, but we got lucky at Harpo's, where some of the videos I think I sent you are at Harpo's. Bob Happy, the manager there, we had a great relationship with him, so we got to warm up Molly Hatchet and some other bands there.
Which is awesome. That's not a shakedown from the Ritz, so that's really cool too.
Yeah,
awesome
actually, I love it. Yeah, the stage, the whole thing, the crew, different vibe, totally. And back then they were running the quarter pitchers of beer night.
Beer night, cheap beer night.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was funny because when we warmed up Molly Hatchet, they're like, Bob's like, you guys want to do it? And we're like, yeah, Molly Hatchet was one of my first shows that they warmed up REO Speedwagon, in 77.
Yeah.
My sister, I think the first night I drank enough alcohol to understand what a hangover is the next day. Vodka in particular. So I'm like, hell yeah, let's do Molly Hatchet. Dude, we get out, we played our first song, which is Burning Alive, which is the single that FNA Records put out, and there's the video for it, and we're just doing our normal show. We had played there pretty steady for a few months at that point, with really good crowds, really good reaction. And Molly Hatchet's crowd, just like, we did one song and you could hear a pin drop, and there were like 2,000 people in there, and I'm like going, oh my God, like seriously. And so we played like a Kiss song or something, little lukewarm, a few, but it was not our thing, and I'm starting to stress out. So I'm like, our bass player saying Hummel Pie, 30 Days in the Hole. I'm like, let's do 30 Days in the Hole. I was like, okay. And then that sort of opened the door, and it turned out to be, people started getting into it, and it turned out great, and it turned out to be a good show. Short, little, cool set. Ended up hanging out with the guys from Molly Hatchet and telling them how great they were back in 77.
Yeah.
Dude, I saw you and Fine Knob.
Were you doing mostly covers at that gig then, or did you start out trying to do original?
At that point, we were just getting ready to put out the Roulette CD at that point, actually cassette it was, and it was a mix. Helter Skelter, Motley Crue, Seek and Destroy by Metallica, but probably 60% originals. If the way the show would go. If it was our show, we would do predominantly our originals.
Of course.
Yeah, so those Harpo's was good to us. It sort of forced us to go out on the road, played the Thirsty Whale up in Wisconsin. We would dip down into, I think, the place around Toledo, rock sets, I think. Yes. Right. And boy, just played Chicago a bunch. Had to kind of get out of the state because
a lot of bands did that time. At least they felt they did.
Yeah, you kind of had to. You get sort of sedentary, doing the same clubs. And we did, I think, do the studio at one point. We did a couple West Side venues, but
do the Token Lounge.
I think we played the Token once, and I know we did Roulette and Slyboy played. The studio was where they did the Ted Nugent contest, and I think Slyboy and Roulette did those shows. Right. Slyboy won one night. We didn't actually win the whole event or whatever.
That was to open up for them at what? Was that for the Whiplash Bash openings?
Yeah, those were fun shows.
Yeah.
And it was good to see, because back then there wasn't a lot of cross-pollination with the East Side and West Side bands.
It was always about that.
Yeah, it was cool to go see what's, I never saw Romeo Rock until seeing them at, I believe, the Studio Lounge. And then after that, they came over and played New York, used to be September's or whatever, on our side, and they came over and did a different thing. But yeah, it's kind of weird because it was those bands and the East Side and the West Side,
Yeah, there was always a battle. My band was kind of in between the two. We played a lot of West Side and the East Side at the same time, where you more or less had to. But we were out of the West Side too. Token, Blondies. You guys ever played Blondies at all?
Did once early on. The other band I was telling you with the girl singer we had, and there was a bar called Tracks.
Yeah, we played Tracks. That was a great place.
Yeah, kind of a rectangular.
Yes.
We played there a couple times. Yeah. So, as far as pretty much every... It's funny because when I was in Witness with Tom Hernandez, that's my high school band, we had the singer Brian Thomas from Halloween in our band. Yeah, it was cool because you know, I think the first practice he came to was in my basement. He had a bunch of cool 8-tracks and stuff, and I think he wore like high heels to practice. And I'm like, this guy's the real deal, you know.
He's from New Jersey, and he's from New Jersey. That's why.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he had the accent. Super cool, crazy sense of humor. We, you know, got along. But he's a pyro, right? And
right.
I mean, obviously, if you've seen a Halloween show.
Oh, yeah. So, I interviewed Brian twice, so yeah, I know him very well.
So yeah, even before Halloween, we were in a band for probably like a year to a year and a half. And he's like, yeah, we need to put some flash pods out. And I'm
blow
like,
something up.
Yeah, we need to blow some shit up. And so we would test it. We'd make little light boards, like with just, you know, you go out and buy like light switches. Mm-hmm. And he was like, yeah, there was a magic shop in Ferndale, and we would go buy the flash powder. He's like, well, you can use gunpowder, but it's not. Yeah. He knew his shit, and it was like, okay. And so we would do stuff like wait at Tom Hernandez's house, like wait for a car to drive by and have the pod sitting right out by the street.
Right.
And like, boom, a car would, you know. And then eventually, this one time we were playing with Brian at this place in Rochester. I think it was Three Faces Lounge or something, and it was up 75, you know, like somewhere up in that area, 15 Mile, whatever. And it had a low ceiling, and I was, at this point, I was like 17 maybe, and it was like a Friday night or whatever. And they're like, and I remember the people going like, where's that kid? You know, meaning me. And I'm like, I'm in the band. I ended up hiding in the bathroom while the band set up. You know, Brian, everyone, they set up. And Brian's like, we're going to blow off some pods tonight. I'm like, dude, the ceiling's pretty low in here. Right. You know, I don't know if we can do it. And we did our set, and we closed, actually, like second from last song, our big thing was Hell's Bells by AC/DC. Mm-hmm. And we blew these pods off, and it went. The smoke hit the ceiling in a half a second and just smoked the entire place out. And people were running out into the parking lot and shit. You know, it was like,
the owner must have loved you guys.
Oh, it was, you know, I was just happy to get out of the bathroom, run to the stage, grab my guitar. It's like, they can't get me up here. But it was interesting.
Was that with, you said Witness? Was that the name of the band?
That was Witness, yeah. Okay. That was my high school band. So, like I said, Brian was with that for a couple years. And then about a year later, I'm like, I forgot what Halloween was before that.
Bitch.
But
they were Bitch.
Yes. Thank you. And I knew he was in that band, and then Halloween, I went up and saw him. I'm like, holy shit! And then, you know, Rick Craig, amazing guitar player. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, I love this band.
Yeah, it was like so, and off they went. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, he was actually in one of my bands, and we did some cool shit with. I learned all about pyro with Brian. That's for sure.
Now let's talk a little bit about the album. One of the things I think you said on there was that it originally came out as a cassette, and you guys discovered that somebody over in Europe or whatever was selling it on eBay for like $250, and that was what enticed you guys to say, hey, let's get this on a CD. How did you guys find out about that? Did just somebody see it on eBay and let you know? How did you find that? How did you find out about that?
Actually, I had put the CD out, I like a small release of it, like 500 or actually 1,000 copies, and sold it. This is around the 2000 time frame. Was just selling them through, I don't know, a friend of mine set up a website, and I sold through all of them. It was interesting, everything hand mail. I would go to the post office once a week with 10 bubble packs with, people from all over. It was kind of cool, Japan, India, to whatever, Europe. And then I ran through them, nothing happened. 10 years later, I think it was FNA Records, one of the folks there, Doc, sends me an email, and he's like, check this out. And I see he sends me a screen dump of, Roulette. It was like $250. Somebody from Australia bought it. And I'm like, wow. What? And so that kind of started it going again. And I ended up teaming up with FNA Records.
Where are they out of?
Ooh, honestly,
are they European label or local? Or?
No, they're local. He does distribute through Europe. There's different distributors that he works with, and they'll split things up. Honestly, that's a good question. I think Florida.
Okay.
But they're like a label of bands that got close to making it but didn't. But they're come to find there's a pretty good market for that.
Oh, there's
stuff.
definitely a market for the 80s, 90s stuff. come back. Like everything else, I mean, you know, the Beatles, how many times did they come around? How many times the Stones, you know, Kiss, you know, so that stuff always comes back around. As far as the CD, like I said, I found it on Spotify. How well has it done since you actually put it out on that as far as sales? Is it still selling pretty well, or is it?
Yeah, it is actually. And what's interesting is put out in tandem with the Pull the Trigger earlier version of stuff that I worked on with Ronnie Masters before Slyboy, some of those originals. And I had done a lot of the roulette stuff on a drum machine. I had a little storefront in Royal Oak, and I would, program a Roland R8 or R5, whatever drum machine I could get. And I recorded all this stuff as demos with like a Fostex reel-to-reel 8-track. And FNA, I said, hey, on a lark, like, check this out. These are the roulette songs before they became roulette, and with the actual band. And the sound quality is nice. It still held up. And so we put both of those out at the same time. What we may do, I still haven't talked to the record company yet about it, but I think it'll be a good go-ahead because because the cassette mix is different. We took it Rob Gerjenke Studios back then, and it's got a ton of reverb, and it's like, overdone, the Poison snare, all that. But when I remixed the stuff, I pulled some of that stuff back, so it's a little more raw sounding. But the cassette mix is a really cool sort of snapshot of the 80s per se, and a little more than where I put it in the 2015 time frame. So I'm gonna run it by them, and I think the next run, instead of doing Pull the Trigger Reloaded, we'll do like Pull the Trigger something loaded, because something related to the cassette, and uploaded. Yeah, there you go. Something, just to put a new product out there, because with those types of things, there's a huge, they keep selling slowly, but we usually sell out of about half of the run right out of the gate, because there's just a whole bunch of people that collect this sort of stuff.
Well, it's nostalgic for people, look back on that. They say, wow, I remember seeing these bands, man. I remember this, and I lost my cassette or whatever. I didn't want to relive that. You had also mentioned something about it. We obviously had those videos. Any plans of putting a video collection together, maybe putting that out, or do you have enough to do that?
Well, it's interesting. I had my son actually. He's into video editing and has a couple TikTok videos that are like over 1 million. If I can get him to put a compilation together, that would be really cool to take sort of a montage, even if it's just audio, maybe with some pictures for some of it, and maybe video.
Sure. Could you have live recordings that you could do, like a live release or anything like that? Anything quality of that type?
Well, nothing that is left over, although on Pull the Trigger, we did. It's funny because Kevin Sharp, who's a pretty well-known producer in this area, worked with Pop Evil, just different folks. And he used to run sound at some of the gigs when Roulette played, and he's like, yeah, I always liked you guys. He would give me a set list with who's doing what solo, and everything was, he was able to dime in the sound really tight. And I told him when we remastered the Roulette stuff recently that we want to put 2 tracks on it and just kind of blend them in and make it sound like, like it blends in with the rest of it. So we did put 2 live tracks on there from New York, and we're listening to him in the studio. He's like, dude, that's my mix. I go, yeah, that's right, you did one. I didn't realize, I found this cassette, and I'm like, oh, cool. It's got it had like Cat Scratch Fever, a couple cover songs on it, and then some of our originals. So to differentiate that from all the bootlegs out there, put the live stuff on there, because another thing that prompted the release of this stuff that the record company came to me was, in Russia in particular, they bootleg this underground stuff pretty heavily. And he said, Steve at the record company sends me a picture of a bootleg of Pull the Trigger. It was our release, but it had fake autographs on it. It had images that were downloaded from like Google, like really grainy, and just like shit production. And they're out there selling it as like signed by the band, and I'm like, no. So when we put this stuff out, I got together with my drummer that lives in Royal Oak, Daryl, and we signed a bunch of them. It's like, this is the real deal. We put the 2 live songs on it, so like no one else has these live songs on it. We tried to kind of pull it away because there's people bootlegging the stuff.
Are you still in contact at all with the, well, you mentioned the drummer, any of the other guys in the band? Are they still around the area? Or?
Not really. My old bass player, Pat, lives, he works for Nickelodeon in California, Hollywood area. Matt, my guitar player, he's in Grand Rapids area. I mean, we're still in touch.
Chance of, with all this stuff, like I said, these 80s groups and all that are popular again, and that whole sound is popular again, I think.
Yeah.
Any type of a potential reunion show of any kind? Has that been brought up at all? Did you guys talk about that at all?
It's come up. It's highly unlikely, you know. It's funny because as much as we all used to practice like every night and be, you know, now it's just to get a rehearsal together, especially obviously being out of state or different end of the state. I think it would be fun, and I think a lot of people would, you know, it'd be like maybe get a few bands like that locally, you know, get a Heaven's Wish, get Romeo Rock, get, you know, even if it's like 4 out of 5 guys or 3 out of 4 guys, it would be total kick-ass just to get, you know, everyone together. But
let me ask you this. One of the guys I interviewed, because you mentioned Romeo Rock, was Don Scarcella, guitar player. He mentioned playing for a while with Roulette. But I noticed there's several bands back in the day called Roulette. Did he play with you guys at all, or is he talking about a different Roulette?
We did some shows. And I know Don, after that, became friends just via NAMM shows, and I know he's worked with Frank Lamar, who worked with Joe Mazzola on a couple in bands back in the day. So yeah, I've stayed in touch with Don. We trade, you know, Facebook texts and stuff.
He never played with you in Roulette?
Not in the same band, no. We were on the same bill for shows. Yeah, maybe that's what he meant. Yeah, definitely some shows. No, that would be cool. He's a great guitar player.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that we should. You know.
I was also wondering, where exactly did you originally record the album? What studio did you say you recorded that at?
We recorded it in what used to be Gordy's Music on 11 Mile, a little storefront that's 11 in Campbell area. When Gordy got out of it, I got wind that he was moving his store, I think it was moving his store. And it's like, the owner of Chicken Shack next door, he's the guy that you know, pay rent to or whatever. So I went and I talked to him, this guy, Phil, British guy. I'm like, hey, you know, and he dealt with Gordy. So he's like, Gordy paid his bills, and I knew who Gordy was, and mentioned, he's like, sure, you know, it was like $250 a month or something. I set up there, and that's where Roulette practiced. I ran a lot of other bands through there. I still have some pretty cool reel-to-reels of stuff. Mike Alonzo's old band, he's in Flogging Molly now, but got to record some pretty cool church choirs, so whatever, you know, whoever I could get in there.
So you guys basically recorded yourself there?
Yeah, I produced and engineered it basically just on a faucet.
Incredible. Does that mean the sound on that, I know you said you remixed it or remastered it for the CD and all that. I would have thought you had to go to some big studio, because that thing sounds totally pro, totally, top flight. I mean, my God, you should have gone on to become a producer, or are you a producer?
I have done projects since then, but it's funny because like the preloaded stuff, the stuff I did on Drum Machine, you know, when you have 8 tracks, you start becoming a producer only because you have to bounce so many things. Sure. So I would do the drums first, then, you know, on the machine, and then lay those down, then do one fake rhythm track, and then I'd have 5 tracks open to do backup vocals, and I would do 5 tracks of those, bounce them down to 1, then use, you know, the other 4 channels to do another 4 backup tracks. And so it was kind of like what Queen did on a smaller scale. You're just overdubbing and getting everything done before you actually go in and do the guitar and bass. And then, you know, lead vocals typically last. So a lot of economizing and
that's
bouncing.
Amazing. I mean, because that sounds, like I said, that sounds phenomenal. And to think that you did it that bare bones is amazing. I mean,
just a couple compressors. I mean, you have to compress everything. I, forced to learn how to use compressors and parametric EQs and some noise reduction. Because the Fostex, it's a pretty hissy tape. It's not half inch, it's quarter inch. So you get a good amount of hiss out of it. So it's constantly gating everything. So that was the challenge when I went back to remix the stuff later. It was like just noise coming in. It's like, oh my God, where's this hiss coming from? And it's like, oh, it's the bass. It's like, seriously? That's coming out of the bass. there's so many like bugs to get out of the, hiss and different things, and what you left on a track, you forget. I put a cowbell on the backup tracks. That was the only place I had, so you're in the middle of your mix, and all of a sudden it's like, Don't Fear the Reaper. It's like, God damn it.
How long did it take you to record the album and mix it?
We did the first four or five songs. It was in 2 chunks. So if you listen, there's 2 slightly different mixes, like based on where it was recorded. Probably not long, maybe a couple weeks for each 4th chunk. So maybe a month, I would say, to record it. And mixing it, not long, couple days. No big,
Wow. Well, that, like I said, it's an excellent recording. I was amazed.
Thanks, man.
I would have thought, like I said, it was done at some New York studio or some big wig studio here, with all the pops and whistles. But think that you did all that off of Fosbeck.
It was a reel-to-reel quarter-inch tape.
Right.
So, back then you could buy those tapes. I would buy the Ampex, but I know when I was doing a church choir one time, the Ampex, you only get about 15 minutes on it, so
at the high
I
level.
was burning through it. They actually sold them at like Rite Aid, the reel-to-reel. I had to run up. You could buy the shitty ones and get like 45 minutes out of a reel-to-reel, because I had this church choir in there that like had 2.5 hours of material without even mixing it, and it was it. But all low tech. And,
that is low tech, but I mean, a lot of stuff was done that way back in the 70s. But you're talking in the 80s and 90s, you were doing this still with that type of equipment.
Yeah,
I love that. I've been talking to a few buddies of mine that I used to jam with and want to do some recording. And I've got an Akai 4-track reel-to-reel with glass heads, the whole 9 yards. I want to record it all on reel-to-reel. Get that real warm analog sound. Like they used to in the old days. That's real interesting, because most of the people I knew that recorded in those days, they were starting to get into the more of the digital, the ADAT and that kind of stuff. But to think you did that at such a high level, that is really incredible.
And it was interesting, because when I did get into ADAT, it became trickier to me, because I'm so it's hard to mess up a guitar tone on a tape. I mean, unless you redline it or record it like without enough input to tape, it's hard to mess up a guitar tone, because the tape just sort of naturally centers it. But with the ADAT, you get the full deal, and like you turn the treble on the board up, and it does this thing that's not always musical. You have more ways to mess up your sound using ADATs or digital. It's a wider range of what you get, but it's like it took me a while to learn how to use digital when it started happening, because it was so accurate. It's like
it never seemed as warm either.
No, not at all. The vocals, everything kind of. It's funny, because now that my ears like tuned to that, I can hear something that was recorded at Sound City. I could just hear like a Rick Springfield song and know that that's the need for that. It's like it just has that certain tone, and you lose that with the digital. It just all sounds the same. It's all crystal clear.
Yes.
Nothing has that sort of personality to it.
That warmth, that overall glow. Yeah. And that made the old 70s and early 80s sounding stuff. You mentioned REO and Molly Hatchet. That was all about those bands in those days. They had that real warm analog feel. Because as they got later into their careers and recorded digital, you're right, it all pretty much sounded the same as the overall tonality of it. I always liked the older style recording. So what are you into these days? Are you still performing? Are you in a group now? What are you doing?
I am still putting out music, working on with my one band I didn't talk about was Motor City Vagabonds, which is, I'm not sure, I'll send you some videos of that if I haven't already. But we put out a release probably about 10 years ago. It sold pretty well. We went through a run, and CD Baby put it out on, I'm not sure if it's out there anymore at this point, but two CDs worth that I'm in the process of uploading on my YouTube channel. Having my son do all that. It's kind of nice. And then I'm working with Frank Coates, who was the guitar player in that project, and we're working on something that the concept is a drop D tuning, a full everything down to Mick Mars tuning, with kind of more of a country, like just like if you drop tuned Billy Gibbon, something like Yeah, just something really weird, like full-on chorus, like Robin Trowery.
Really cool.
Yeah, I want to, start using different tunings, and because quite honestly, I'm bored with, I couldn't go back and do anything that I've done in the past because it's done.
You're not writing stuff like the roulette style stuff anymore.
This is all more kind of bluesier, southern fried, all the riffs. Yeah, just good rock and roll, but like funky tunings and super drop, Korn tunings, but with ZZ Top riffs. Yeah, just something out of left field, and so I'm just trying to focus on staying within that framework and just coming up with songs that, not like 4 cool, grungy country songs and then something that sounds like, Burn Alive. That's never going to happen. I can't, I can still sing the high notes, which I feel fortunate. I quit smoking in 2000. I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't, it's just like clean living. I have a voice. I want to work on my voice and get, do something different with that as well. So we'll see. Yeah,
that's very cool.
Exciting, still in it.
Well, Joe, it's been great talking to you. I'm going to let you go. It's been really cool talking to you, brother.
Same here, brother.
All right.
You have a good rest of your weekend, and we'll be in touch.
All right, man. Sounds good. Take care.
All right, man.
All right,
peace, man. Bye-bye.
All right, that was Joe Motor, who originally played with Slyboy and Roulette, and is on the Bigger and Better Things. He also played in Witness with Brian Thomas, which I didn't know about. But anyway, this has been Jimmy Jive and Motor City Rock Talk saying, keep rocking.